welcome to an all spooky season edition of Roundtable Mindset,
where we're serving up all things spooky and Halloween for the month of October, and we're going to be dishing up perspectives on topics that we normally do not dare touch.
Well, hello, and welcome back to Roundtable Mindset. This is Jamie.
And I'm Mahlon.
And we're back for an episode of our podcast today. But first.
So we have, so just to make sure everybody knows, because we forgot to do this on our last episode, Jamie, but we have to kind of give an update or, not an update, but
a sneak
the
peek.
words are escaping.
A preview. Of the episode today.
Here's what we're doing for the month of October, because we forgot to do that in our last episode.
It's spooky season.
Cue the music. So Jamie and I kind of had an idea that to do something fun for the month of October, we were going to go and do something that was spooky related and, Halloween-esque, and just kind of have some fun with it for the next couple downloads, a couple episodes that we have. So the month of October is going to be dedicated to, like I said, all things scary, Halloween, supernatural, anything that you can kind of start thinking about related to Halloween. So today we have our food for thoughts kind of slanted towards that a little bit. And we also have a very special guest that we'll be introducing in a little bit later, joining us for our first Halloween episode.
Yes, we're super excited. So welcome to the spooky series of Roundtable Mindset. We're excited to bring these episodes to you, and I'm not ashamed to say it. So
I think we've been saying that for the last 7 episodes. So
clearly I'm not ashamed. It's fine. Yeah. I'll be the excited one. It's all right.
Well, to kind of kick us off, let's go ahead and start with our food for thought for today, which I think is very interesting. This one, when we were talking about this before, Jamie, it was something that I was mulling over in my brain. I'm like, well, there is a lot to say about this food for thought. So let's go ahead and start with the question, and we'll just roll with it. So here's the food for thought question today. What is the difference between belief, faith, and knowledge?
What is the difference between belief, faith, and knowledge? So, well, I don't know. I think those are 3 very different things. Do you agree? Belief, faith, and knowledge.
I think they can be. I think they're also woven together. So when I think of the words belief, faith, and knowledge, they all have different components to themselves. So if I break off belief, I can have belief in things. Faith, I can put my faith in my Christian beliefs. And knowledge is the information that I can observe, I can take in, I can process. Some of it's tangible. And then I can use that to then strengthen the other 2 of those words. So for me, broken up individually, yes, I could see how they're standalone, but I also think they're all interconnected. And one could enhance or support the other one, if that makes sense.
Can it also contradict the other?
Well, I don't know if you would have faith or belief in something that you don't think there's knowledge to support.
Okay.
If that's what you're talking about.
Well, because I'll be super honest. When we started talking about this morning, because Mahlon and I get to hang out this weekend again, which is way fun. When we started talking about this morning, I was kind of like, no, I don't want to talk about that. Mostly because I tend to, like, when someone asks me what I believe, I typically say I don't believe. There's what I know and what I don't know. And if I don't know, it's just what I don't know. And that's okay. If it's something that I know, it's a fact, right? So I don't tend to have like a system of belief in things. There's things that I understand and have knowledge about, and there's things that I don't have knowledge about. And so but I think that's because that term was kind of, I feel like that word belief was kind of convoluted with faith for me, which I do think is a little bit different. But for me, but then I started thinking about things like belief in people. I believe in the power of a human being to overcome great obstacles. I believe that I have the ability to affect change for myself and for the people around me that want my help to make changes. So I do have some belief in that. So I don't know. This one's just all kind of like mushled in my brain today. It's really kind of throwing me a bit. So
yeah, so I would say that, in my opinion, everybody has some sort of form of belief. Now, and what they believe in varies, but I believe everybody has a belief structure in their life. Faith is a different one. I would agree with you that my understanding of faith is also slanted towards my religious beliefs. I have faith in all of those things that in Christianity. And knowledge, to me, if I would compartmentalize that is more of the data, the ones and zeros, the facts, the things that I can put my hat on and say, this is proven by X, Y, and Z. And so I know this to be the truth and the facts. And when I look at those things separately, like I said, I think my faith, I know my faith interacts and supports my beliefs. My beliefs help kind of guide what I put my faith into, and the knowledge that I gain through, reading the Bible, talking with other people, science books that I've read, or experiments that I did. I'm trying to go back to when I was in high school and college, and we had to prove out these experiments to write down things that were going to happen. And all of that kind of stuff is all knowledge that we can take in and process. And so, again, I look at these and I can answer that question to say, yes, they're all individual, but I also think they're all interconnected. And one, I think, can positively, or I think to your point earlier, can they contradict themselves? I'm trying to think as I'm talking here. I can't think of a time when they would contradict, but I could see where maybe over time knowledge changes, you learn more things, so your belief system might start getting impacted. For some people, that could also start impacting their faith structure, and so that could change over time. So to put a final pin into your original question, do I think they can contradict each other? I'm going to say no as of right now, as I continue to think, but that doesn't mean that it stays stagnant. I think all three of those things are in constant motion, and maybe constantly moving for some people, maybe at slower paces, but I think they're always in motion, if that makes sense.
So you've never learned something new that impacted your belief in something. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I'm trying to think. In the context of my Christian belief, I would say no to that. In other things, I could say yes, probably.
So and this might be a little unfair because I know this about you and nobody else does. Other people do, but in the podcasting ethos spirit, nobody else knows this. But even within your faith, don't you think you learn things that affect your belief system as you move through your faith journey, even? Because what I'm thinking, I guess what I'm getting at is, for me, if what I'm learning isn't affecting what I'm believing, then I'm wondering if I'm doing it right. You know what I mean? So if what I'm learning isn't informing my belief system, which really is the driver of me as a human being, right? If our belief system drives our actions, then what I learn and what I observe should be informing that, right?
So I was probably thinking so much to your contradiction question. So I would agree with what you're saying. There's things that I can take in throughout my life. I believe, and my faith and my knowledge is a lot more advanced now than it was when I was 14 years old. So to that aspect, I can agree with what you're saying. In the context of it was ever contradictory to myself, that's where I was answering, is like, I don't believe that has happened in my life. Changing or impacting one or the other, I think, happens naturally through growth. And that's what I was talking about when I was saying these things are in motion. So I think you and I are saying the same things with regards to that. I was just answering from did it contradict? Does it ever contradict one another? And that's where I was saying, I don't believe I can come up with a time in my life that I can say that.
One thing I tried a few years ago when I really started trying on this idea that I don't believe, there's what I know and what I don't know. I was shocked at how many times in a sentence I could say the words, I believe. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like just part of a sentence structure for me when I'm talking about certain things, well, I believe that if we all do this, then we can believe in this, right? I mean, it can be really, so it makes me wonder if I need to go back and think about that again and how we use that language. Cause I feel like that's probably one of those words that we toss around, and don't necessarily put the weight on it that it deserves sometimes. But as far as the contradictory thing, I can easily say that I feel like knowledge has contradicted some of the belief systems that I've had in different things at different times. And I think that's part of the whole, we've touched on it a little bit. We haven't really talked a lot in depth on our podcast about this, but like, I kind of feel like I'm in a deconstruction period of my, I don't know, I guess religious beliefs or faith or whatever you want to call it. And that's part of that process for me has been like, there's this amount of information that I see as fact that has been proven to me as fact, that I believe is fact. And then there is this set of information and it's not matching up. And so I kind of love that process about learning new things and being in an environment where we can take what we've learned and compare it to what we have always known, and that causing growth in us for different things. So yeah, I don't know. That's the end of the thought because I kind of lost myself.
Well, there's definitely some things in my life that I could tip my hat to that statement you just made. There's some things in my life though that they've stayed constant since faith to me is one of them. I also think there's categories in which it naturally feels like it should change. When I go to science to me is one of those things that things are fact until you can prove them otherwise. So for me, if I just looked at it from a purely scientific mind, I would say that is something that, yes, my belief structure probably could change. And I could probably, through other knowledge that you gain or misunderstandings, and now I have suddenly a whole new set of data in front of me or information in front of me, that answer that I thought was yes was all along a maybe or a strict no. So in that context, I could tip my hat to that. I could understand and maybe start seeing that. When you start going back to something that is deeply rooted within me, again, going back to the faith, there has been nothing that's been discovered from the time that I was born in my life to where I'm at now that has altered or changed anything that have to do with that. So there is no new knowledge. There is no new findings. There is no new contradictory information in that space, because that is deeply rooted, and that is knowledge that I've had since I was born, going back as far as civilization can go back. But when you talk about science, like a good example that I have with that would be the whole, and I know everyone cringe, but the whole COVID incident that we just went through a couple years ago. Yeah,
I'm just pre-cringing for you.
Just know, like we all as a society reacted to the best that we could, and the CDC and everybody was telling us all these things we needed to do, all to come, as we went through it, that information changed. Some of it we'd expect because we've never gone through this before, and some of it people had common sense and was like, I don't think that's the way we should go, and so they would follow what they believed was right versus what they're being told. But in that whole environment, you could see situations where information was coming up and was changing the course of what we should be doing, because we were learning more, we were advancing, we were going through and gaining experience that we didn't have before. So I guess long-winded way of saying, I think I could see what you're talking about in those different areas. But for me, there's some categories that I would say it has never happened, and nor do I expect it to happen in my lifetime. But there would be some areas that I think change and contradictory and new information and new findings is almost an everyday occurrence. In this example that I gave you, like science, that is something that's everly changing and constantly moving and always adapting. And we find new things out and we disprove what we thought was truth last year. And now we have this new set of truth because we disproved it. So we're constantly trying to make ourselves better. So again, now I'm being long-winded, but I think to answer your question, I could see what you were talking about. And I could agree to some extent.
Well, and I honestly, it's funny because I feel like this is something we could probably talk for a couple hours about. But
easy.
But I think we probably should move on and bring our special guest on. So
Yes,
maybe
I
we'll
would agree.
touch on this one another time, because I think this is a fascinating piece. And I think it's something that every person really has to come to an understanding of what their belief, faith, and knowledge, how that impacts who they are as a person and how they move forward and interact with the world. So,
well, and I think it would be really interesting to hear other people other than yours and I's perspective to see what that means to them as well, because I think it can be very personal, especially when you're talking about faith and belief. Individual faith, individual belief, it can be very specific and very personal to each and every one of us. So I wouldn't want to whitewash that conversation, is what I'm trying to say.
well, the irony is that I think we are the most interesting people in the room until we bring on our guest today. So I'm trying to segue.
Good point. Good point. Good point.
So today we have, and this does kind of, I don't know, we kind of thought that this intersected with our topic today. Today we have a special guest with us. Her name is Susan, and Susan comes to us as a practicing witch, and we're going to find out what that means to her and more about what that looks like for Susan. So welcome to Roundtable Mindset, Susan. We're excited to have you here.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. And that conversation was kind of all my love languages at once, because those are the questions I like to engage with. So thanks for letting me be part of that.
We call these
we
call these the Midnight Perkins conversations, because this is what we used to do in college until 3:00 in the morning.
And sometimes we would have to like force ourselves to get into the car as we drove away, as we are talking at each other through the window, because we still have so much to say. And then the next day we saw each other, we would literally pick up where we left off and just be like, okay, we're keeping going. So those were kind of fun times.
You'd have thought we were philosophy majors, but we weren't.
Until the philosophy majors heard us and they just shook their head like, oh my goodness.
Right. We thought we were so cool. Anyway, welcome to the conversation, Susan. We're excited to have you be part of it.
Much.
So,
Excellent.
So we'd love to start off, but maybe before we really dig into some of the questions that Mahlon and I have, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and maybe a little bit about your journey in this space.
Sure. Yeah, I think I would have liked hanging out at Perkins with y'all in college, although if it had been down in Texas where I went to school, it probably would have been a Whataburger or a Denny's, but that's all right.
Denny's is cool. We didn't have those.
Oh, there's something to be said about Perkins. The fact that they have Boston cream pie pancakes on the menu right now is pretty magical. So got to go get me some of those.
Yeah, now I know what I want for breakfast tomorrow, Mahlon.
Yeah, right. I'm Susan. I use she, her pronouns, or any pronouns that are offered with respect. And I am both a practicing witch and I am an anthropologist of religion. So those two things kind of go together. My like intellectual knowledge, knowing, I refer to it often as knowing instead of knowledge. But my intellectual knowing and knowledge and sort of my spiritual and experiential knowledge and knowing. I'm a native Midwesterner who spent 30 years in Texas and is now back in the Midwest. And I work in higher education. And I also am still publishing and writing and researching about witchcraft and other sort of contemporary spiritual and religious movements. Share my little quiet house in the suburbs with my wife and a couple of cats, because you can't be a witch and not have a cat, or so I'm told. Although I do not have a black cat at the moment. They are both brown. So I keep arguing that we got to add one to the clouder, but I so far haven't been able to make that happen. And I have been practicing various forms of witchcraft for 30 years. So since I was 17, so we can all do that math. I started out actually with reading tarot when I was 17, and I bought my first tarot deck in a little tiny town in South Dakota in 1990 whatever. So you can imagine how easy that probably was. They had to go into the back of the store and like find the one deck they had and like blow the dust off it.
So it wasn't like Hot Topic back in those days, like where you could go and find all those things.
I'm almost envisioning in my mind as this form of contraband. Like the person's looking over their shoulder, they bring it out in a little brown paper bag, and they just slide it across the counter, and just like shh.
You're close. It was a B. Dalton, if you all remember those, walking into the like a Walden Books type situation, because we certainly didn't have a metaphysical shop anywhere, and this was before the internet, right? Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, so I've got this deck of cards. Like, I'm told I need a book. And the bookseller went into the back of the store, came out with one book, and said, "This is what we have." And it was Arthur Edward Waite's Pictorial Key to the Tarot. Publication date 1911.
Oh my God. So you're saying this is real recent stuff that you're getting your hands on?
Yeah, real recent. And like I said, I'm like a 17-year-old heavy metal listening small town girl with a, car that I'm drag racing. And I pretty much want to read tarot because I think it's a cool party trick. And this was right in the middle of the satanic panic. So it was like, ooh, I could be a little scary. And so it was something just to do, something to like be different. And I fell in love with it. And the more that I read, the more I was like, okay, like this is actually a really complex system. And there's a lot to learn here. And there's a lot to learn about myself. And because I am who I am, I dove in really deep. And I joke that tarot is actually my longest relationship. I still have that deck that I bought in the B. Dalton in 1991 or 1992. It's still, probably the practice I go back to most. And that was because I was then in that world. I started to get exposed to other folks that are in sort of metaphysical worlds, and started doing some reading, and there were some things because of what was happening in the zeitgeist that people were talking about, like what witchcraft is and what it isn't, and what Wicca is, and could this be a religion? And there was an article by a Good.
Oh, I was going to say, can we jump in right there? There's a couple.
Yeah.
So you said, I'm told I need a book. Can you tell me, in the Midwest at that time, during all of that stuff that, having to find it in the back of the closet or whatever, where were you getting your information? Like, how did you even get introduced?
That's a great question. So one of my friends took a gap year after, she was a couple years older than I. She took a gap year after high school, and she went out to become a nanny for an East Coast couple. So she went to Boston for a year, and she came back and she said, let me show you what I learned to do. And she pulled out this deck of cards, and I was like, I've only ever seen those in movies.
On TV, right.
Or on TV, right? I guess intellectually, I knew they were a thing, but I couldn't have told you the difference between a tarot deck and a deck of playing cards at the time. But she showed me the cards, and she read for me, and I was like, I want to learn to do that. Because, she's going to go back to college, and, I'll be the only one that does it. And that was something that would just be kind of cool.
So I'm going to take a pause right there, because I think I know what tarot cards are. I think I've been exposed to them. But just in the off chance that I'm misunderstanding what their purposes are, I just want to kind of throw something against you, Susan, to see am I even in the right realm. So to me, tarot cards were like a fortune telling tool. They were things that and I'm trying to remember, because I like to relate to my guests as much as possible, and I'm going to be honest.
Sure.
You and I, it's the hardest that I'm trying to relate to, just because I don't practice witchcraft. I do a different path for myself. But when I was in high school, my girlfriend's aunt, and I didn't realize it even at the time, but I don't know if she would have claimed herself to be a practicing witch or not. And after the fact, when I reflected back on it, I'm like, oh, I'm wondering if she was, because this was my first interaction with somebody who did tarot readings. And the way that it was described to me was just that, like, I had to shuffle the deck. I think it was like a couple of different times. And then she took the deck and then she laid out, and she asked me a question. I can't even remember what it was, but some formation she wanted me to put down. And I'm like, I don't know. So she picked for me. And then she started putting these cards down. And after she got the cards, she turned them over. And every time she turned them over, and it was whatever the card was, the 7 of Swords, I think is one of them, but swords, she would tell me something and she would refer back to this book and she'd be like, oh, this is what this is meaning. So I'm going to stop there and see if I am anywhere close to what a tarot card is in your conversation.
Yes. Yeah. You, my friend, had a tarot card reading. Yes. And that is a really common way that people read. And, tarot is a system. It's one of those things where lots of people who are witches read tarot, but lots of people who aren't read tarot. Some people think of it as a like fortune telling, whatever that word means for you. Divination is the word that I like, which is looking to find patterns to get an overarching message. I don't think that they predict the future set in stone. I also think they're really a useful tool to learn about yourself. To meditate on the images. The classic tarot deck is really rooted in a lot of archetype theory. Like if you've ever gotten into sort of Carl Jung and all of that, I can talk tarot all day long. Like those, I never get bored with those 78 cards.
Yeah. Well, and I have another question that I want to go, but just because I want to touch on the actual word of what the meaning of witchcraft is. But before we get there, though, I want to ask you, in my interaction and kind of what I'm hearing you say, can you tell me, it seems like chance is a really big player, especially in the tarot card. So I'm just curious, does chance usually play such a big role in like the witchcraft or the tools that witches use, like tarot cards?
That's a great question. And if you ask 12 witches, you'll get 13 different answers. I tend to think that nothing is really random. But where we there is chance and probability in what cards you draw, right? But I also, to go back to what y'all were saying earlier, believe that you pull the cards that you pull because there's something in the way they relate to each other that conveys knowledge to you. So, there are definitely people that'll is there coincidence? Is there chance? Is there randomness in the universe? Is there, a little bit of chaos going on? And the way that I practice, it all kind of works together. Like, I don't believe that there's sort of a guiding divine hand that reaches down and plays chess with us. There are people that read tarot and people that practice witchcraft who do believe that their gods are much more involved in their life. I started with tarot and I've learned all kinds of other forms of divination, because like I said, it's about spotting patterns. And one of my favorite definitions of what a witch is comes from Starhawk, who's my favorite author, on modern American witchcraft. I love her. I want to be her when I grow up, although I'm running out of time. And when she was asked in an interview once what a witch was, she said a witch is somebody who's paying attention. And I take that to heart. Like, I am paying attention. And I'm looking for patterns, and I'm looking for what I can learn and know from the world around me and what I can learn from the earth. And all that taken together is what sort of forms my worldview. And so tarot is one piece of that, right? And you can totally read them just for fun. Mm-hmm. They can totally be a cool party trick that you pull out. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm like, go, do the thing. for me, it became a much deeper practice. And I mostly read for myself for the longest time because it was a self-development tool. And I had from my friend, her name was Roxanne, who showed me how to read the first time. She said, you should probably get a book. The little white insert that comes with the deck isn't great. And so, as we call them, the LWB, the little white book. So, she had all kinds of books that she'd bought in Boston, but here I am in like small town South Dakota. So
yes,
we get the one book out of the back of the Beetle.
The access to those things probably were a little limited.
Yeah.
But now,
and I still have that book.
Very good. One of the questions I have, it's, I hear, okay, let me be super transparent. My most extensive knowledge of witchcraft comes from Charmed. If I could be Piper, I would be Piper. That was my whole thing, right? But what's interesting about that is that I have some friends, I have some people in my life that I have crossed paths with who do believe in paganism and some of these other forms of faith and I don't know, do you call them religions, right? So I guess my question for you is it's very easy. It's very easy to spot and categorize so many different types of belief systems and faiths. And I am very confused by how that works in paganism and witchcraft and Wicca. And, there's all these words that I think people who aren't involved in that community use interchangeably and don't really understand. Yes. Can you talk a little bit about that for us?
Sure, because that totally is something that happens. It's like my wife says, she's like, you get together with your witchy friends and you know how twins have a language only they can understand. Sometimes listening to you is like that. So, I think like the overarching term of witchcraft is a practice, and it's found in lots of different forms across lots of different cultures. And, the anthropologist in me will tell you that there are places where Westerners describe practices as witchcraft that I don't know people would call themselves. So witchcraft itself is not a religion, but it is a part of some religious practices or some practices that fall under this like larger umbrella. You'll hear people use the words paganism, neo-paganism, or contemporary paganism, like pretty interchangeably. And paganism is a group of, I say religions because it meets the anthropological definition of a religion, and that it's a worldview that has practices.
Okay.
So there are lots of different things that fall under the pagan umbrella. So there's things like Wicca, which is a very specific pagan religion. Most Wiccans call themselves witches. So, I like to say it's an imperfect analogy, but kind of like how all Methodists are Christians, but not all Christians are Methodists.
Yes.
All Wiccans are pagans, not all pagans are Wiccans.
Gotcha.
And so there are lots of different religions that fall under the pagan umbrella. Some of them incorporate witchcraft or magical practice, and some do not. And one of the things that is appealing to a lot of folks, I actually did my doctoral dissertation on this topic, is that because although there are large national and international pagan organizations and Wiccan organizations, there's no hierarchy like with, there's no bishops. There's no one path to get ordained to be clergy. People can really shape these paths, ways that fit with, what they believe, what they have faith in, and what they know. Some people go through Wiccan traditions where there is, you have groups that have a process by which you get trained. They have degrees of initiation. People like myself have a much more organic practice. Mm-hmm. So when I myself use the term witch for myself, I'm not a Wiccan witch. I can talk about Wicca. I've been in that world. But I am speaking in a more general sense. And as it, as you go out there and talk to people who are under that umbrella, they have different relationships. And then of course there are people that are atheists that don't have like they wouldn't consider themselves religious people, but they engage in practices that we would call witchcraft. So if it feels like it's smooshy, it's because it is.
It feels a little bit like a buffet.
It is a bit.
Well, it's kind of like you pick and choose what you want at the time, which I can see can be kind of convenient, but at the same time, kind of confusing for someone who's looking on the outside going, but wait, what does this mean? Because I look for edges, right? That's where when I try to understand something, I'm like, where's the edges so I can get my mind wrapped around it. What you're explaining doesn't really have defined edges. It's kind of like,
it doesn't.
But I don't want to steer the conversation just one facet of this, because I think what you're saying is really, is interesting. It's giving us insight. It's giving me a base understanding to hopefully formulate some more intelligent questions as we keep going on this topic. But I can't lie to you. One of the things that as a young person I was really drawn to was supernatural. Like I love ghost stories. I love hauntings, all of that. Well, also going into, I think I heard you say magical practices. So there was a point in my time, early childhood, that kind of went through until adolescence, where magic was real. Like you could do some things, So do you mind talking about and hitting on when you say magical practices? Can you elaborate on that just a little bit more?
Sure. So what I don't mean is things like in practical magic, blowing on a candle and lighting it. I don't mean making things explode, like anything from a Joss Whedon show. Like, I don't mean that.
So sorry, Jamie.
Charmed? I was going to say, are you telling me this isn't real?
Okay.
Like, no.
Here's the thing, is that there were Wiccan consultants on Charmed. And so parts of Charmed, they get really, really, really right.
Well, and
then Hollywood takes over.
Quite frankly, I think that's the thing about it, is that when I was watching that show at that time, that's when I did have friends that were close to me that were practicing different pagan faith paths, right? And so it was interesting to me because I would hear them talk about something and then see it on the show. And I'm like, okay, is this more real than can I be Piper? This is really the question I need to ask is, can I be Piper? I'm just kidding. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
You could probably be Piper. Whether you could do everything Piper could do is
it's the whole
thing.
freeze time thing. That's what I'm looking for.
I know. I've had a superpower. So I'm gonna go to Starhawk again, whose definition of magic is the one that I like best. And she says magic is the art of changing consciousness at will. So the use of practices to like change the way we think about a situation, and for people that sort of have a worldview, I won't say belief structure, or worldview where magic works. It's the ability that by changing our consciousness, and yes, there can be, manipulation of stuff. I'm looking at my crystals and my herbs here in my office. A change in our consciousness and an interaction with the natural world, can affect changes both in ourselves and in our outer world.
So
they're often very, very, very subtle.
Can we unpack that for a second? Because, I have a long life of exploring all kinds of different faith paths and religions and things like that. It's something that's always kind of fascinated me, and I feel like it's something that that has been a driver for me a lot. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I noticed the most when I was practicing Christianity is that the act of praying about something, it's almost like it changed my attitude toward things, right? Mm-hmm. So if there was someone that I was really angry with, or something like that, and I spent some time sending some positive intentions through prayer in that direction, it's almost like fake it till you make it, or dress it till you believe it, kind of an idea. And it really did kind of change my intentions toward that person. Is that kind of, the statement that you made kind of touched that for me? Is that kind of what that means?
I think, and as somebody who, I was raised in a very particular form of Christianity. So my understanding of how prayer works is informed by that. So for me personally, the difference between, because one, I think most folks I know that are Christians who say that they pray about something would not like me to say, oh, well, that's magic. And I probably wouldn't.
That is correct.
I was going to say, there's a Christian in the room. We can ask him.
Yeah. So
right. And I know some people that wouldn't mind, but for me, the distinction is sort of like where that energy or that prayer goes. Like, who's the prime mover in the situation? And I don't want to speak for Mahlon, but for the Christians I grew up among, is they would say, well, I prayed and I handed it over to God, or they might talk about Jesus, or my Catholic friends might talk about the saints. And that, like, God changed my heart and allowed me to, like, be different in this situation. And that's a great way to understand it, right? That you have somebody that you sort of put this before, and that they were able to help change your heart and change your situation. For myself, in practicing the kind of magic I practice, and not all magic is witchcraft, but in the magic that I practice, it's something that I changed within myself, and by, like, interacting with the natural world. So, like, I'm looking at a piece of rose quartz right now. So, rose quartz is said to have the ability to kind of, like, heal your heart. So if I'm really mad at somebody, I will go and I'll sit and I'll do my little meditation with my rose quartz. That probably means I'm then going to go have a conversation with them. But that is a way of sort of using the tools that I have around me to bring myself to a place to make the changes in my world I need to make. The difference is that I, and arguably the world out there, for some folks, they do talk about a god or a goddess as a prime mover. But for me, I haven't given it over to anybody who's going to make a change for me. It's that I am making a change in my world myself. I don't think either is right or wrong, or true or not true. It's just sort of a different way of understanding how we interact and how we believe we interact with divinity, with spirit, with the world, and our relationship there. I don't tend to have, I'm not really a theist in my practice. I'm more of a humanist. So I think that for me, like, goddess images are very useful as imagery. I don't necessarily believe that there is a goddess in the universe someplace that reaches down and puts her hand on me. There are witches that do. Mm-hmm. I do not.
Okay. I have a feeling Mahlon has some questions.
Yeah. So as the resident Christian in the room, I do want to say for me, for praying, I heard a couple I statements, and what resonated from both Jamie, you, and Susan, what hit my ear was, when I pray to God and I pray to Jesus, it is communicating with them. It is saying, hey, I need some guidance. I need some help. I need you to help move some obstacles in my way. I need you to do something, or I would like you to do something miraculous. Praying, though, the way that it's intended is also saying what the will of God is. So God is not going to do anything that's against his own way of doing things. So in the Christian faith, when we pray, we are communicating with God. We are asking God to intercede. We're asking him, hey, I'm struggling here. Sometimes that's as, I need you to change my heart. I need you to give me insight. I need you to take this burden from me. And sometimes the answer is no. And I think it's the praying and that communication and that communion that we have with God over time in that relationship, you start understanding why sometimes it's yes, I will do that, and sometimes it's no, I won't. So I just want to clarify, when, Jamie, we were saying praying, and Susan, you were kind of expanding on from your point of view. From my point of view as a Christian, that's the importance and that's the difference of praying. It has nothing to do with what I have the ability to do. It has everything to do with what God has said. Yes, I will change this for you, or no, I need you to go through this and I still need you to rely on me, even though you don't understand. I do. Have that faith that we talked about before, and I'm still here. I still love you. I'm still going to guide you, but sometimes that answer is no. And so I just want to put that little clarification out there, because when I was hearing you guys talk, I was like, there's a lot of, what you guys would do, or how this is, you're handling it. I just wanted to highlight that for a second.
No, and thank you for that, because it's definitely like, as you know, one of my Christian friends says, like, God's not Amazon.com,
Right.
Like you don't just ask, because sometimes what you're asking for, the way that at least she and I had this same conversation at some point. She said it's not necessarily that I'm asking like, hey God, hey, Saint whoever, come do this for me. It's that this situation is challenging, and either I need something to change, or I need to kind of like know why this is happening, and sometimes it is like, all right, like it's not going to change. I got to go through this. But that in and of itself, because you have a relationship with a deity who you trust and you love, and you can communicate with them that way, that also is useful. So I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it. So thank you for that.
One of the things that this sparked for me, because I feel like as I've progressed through life in figuring myself out and figuring out where I fit in this big world that we live in, it's almost like, I remember once I used the word meditation in a Christian circle, and it was like this huge taboo thing. And I feel like that's kind of something you said, Susan, that just kind of tripped that trigger for me to say, that kind of reminds me of how that has shifted for me, where that meditation now is more of a space for me to be reflective and say, okay, what are my attitudes and how am I contributing to the outcome of this, and how can I affect that? And so it's really interesting that how it's almost like I feel like those things connecting from both of you in both of those ways that I have interacted with these different things. So, and
it's interesting, like as a religious scholar, and having sort of come up the way I came up, and then having moved to the South, like, in the buckle of the Bible Belt, as a young person, and realizing that even sort of different, forgiving the metaphor, different flavors of Christianity have very different feelings. Because, I have friends that are contemplative Christians. They go to Tay's ceremony and they'll tell you, yeah, I'm going to go meditate. Whereas in my mother's church, if I had said meditation, they would have immediately gone to Buddhism. And for them, Buddhism was Satanism. Right. And so even just how we understand these concepts can be so like bound, not even by the overarching worldview, but by the specific groups in which we find ourselves, and how we understand those things. And how that, as you were talking about, like the more knowledge you have, it doesn't necessarily contradict your faith or your belief, but sometimes our beliefs open up to incorporate the new knowledge that we have.
Something you just said too, living in Texas for so long, I'm curious how, because I do feel like so often the paganism and witchcraft and Wicca and all of those things often get lumped together and labeled as satanic or, that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about how the truth or myth in that, and maybe how that has interactions with that general conception have impacted you?
For sure. It's a great question. And, Texas is an interesting place because definitely it is, as I said, it's the buckle of the Bible Belt, but there's a lot of religious exploration. One of the largest, sort of using that umbrella term, pagan populations in the country is in Texas. And as somebody that I interviewed for my dissertation who was from deep East Texas, she said, honey, we might be in the buckle of the Bible Belt, but we are also in the girdle of the goddess. Do not forget it. And I kind of loved that. And I think that I grew up in the middle of, I grew up as a young person exploring paganism, exploring witchcraft in the middle of the satanic panic of the 90s. And we're seeing some similar things happening in the culture now, which is a whole other podcast episode.
Or four.
But, I am somebody who got death threats from an evangelical Christian group on my campus. Like security had to walk me back to my dorm.
Oh, wow.
Because they felt like it was their job to, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live, right? And I'm like, I'm over here with my crystals and my vegan food. Like, what's going on? I also recognize that as an outlier. So I think, there's a couple of ways in which paganism generally and witchcraft specifically gets conflated with Satanism. And one is a worldview, I'm going to use the word narrow. I don't mean that in a judgment way. I mean that just literally in that there's a very specific single path in this belief system, is that anything that's not a particular interpretation of Christian doctrine is automatically satanic. I had people tell my Catholic friends they were worshiping Satan too. So that's a particular worldview, right? And that's one that you can bring new evidence, and that's not one that's necessarily going to change for people. That's where they're at, is that anything that isn't exactly what they do is de facto evil.
Gotcha.
So there's that. Mm-hmm. And we can definitely put that to the side. That's a conversation. And I think a conversation that needs to be had within those communities, because they're not going to be open to listen to me. Right. But then there are folks who see the things that we see in Hollywood, that, people have watched a lot of horror movies, that have a worldview that, involves things like demons, in which Satan is a real personified being that you can interact with. And of course, 2000 years of bad press, starting with the witch trials in Europe, right? We've come to conflate all those things in a lot of really interesting ways that I don't always understand. Mm-hmm. But those are the places where I often have a conversation, because I'm not going to talk you out of your belief. These folks that we put over to the side with the more stringent view, I'm not going to talk you out of that. And I don't know that I want to talk you out of that. You're getting what you need out of that belief system. Who am I to tell you that you're wrong? Mm-hmm. But people over here, they're like, oh, I think you do this. And don't you guys sacrifice puppies and invoke demons? And I'm like, I've been around a lot. I've never been in a pagan or a witchcraft circle where any of that has happened. And so I think some of it is pop culture gets in, and, we're scared of what we don't know. And, occasionally there are folks that engage in, we'll use the word occult practices that do some pretty horrendous stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to lie and tell you that's not out there. I will tell you that is not the kind of witchcraft I practice, nor people that would call themselves pagan practice. Okay. Even people who self-identify as Satanists don't do that. I've hung out with a lot of LaVeus Satanists. They're actually pretty nice people. But we have these horrible things that happen. And in a worldview where there's good and there's evil and they both move in the world, and it's easy for it all to get lumped in. It's definitely, I've seen a change over the last 30 years, and unfortunately I'm starting to see a change back. Although honestly, I've been accused of being a Satanist more for being gay than for being a witch, which is kind of a trip. I did not have that on my 2023 bingo card, but here we are. So
where do you get your 2023 bingo card? Because I have not gotten mine yet, apparently.
Oh, I just had to draw up my own. Actually, I joke I should probably use a bingo card generator online to create one. That was different. Yeah. It's oh, okay, that's new. So, I think because witchcraft in particular is a very fungible word, right? It can mean it's used in a lot of different ways. Mm-hmm. It's, used to refer to a lot of different things. And it kind of goes back to what you said earlier, Jamie, where it's this feels squishy. So, we use the word witchcraft to talk about what people were accused of in Salem. We use the word witchcraft to talk about what people in voodoo do. We use the word witchcraft to talk about anything that seems nefarious or unexplainable. And if that's your cultural context and you meet me and I'm like, hi, I'm Susan, I'm a witch, you have no context for me.
Right.
That is what you have. Maybe you read the Witch of Blackbird Pond when you were a kid, or maybe you read Harry Potter. And so that's, I think, where it gets smooshy for people. And it's just easier to stick it all under this one label.
Yeah.
Well, I know for me, it's, I've said this before in the past, having this podcast and having people like you come on, Susan, we just met a couple days ago, and now we're talking really for the first time on this podcast. And so I think that's really cool. And I think this gives me an opportunity to talk to individuals that are outside of not only my social circle, but outside of my peripheral vision. I mean, I don't associate with other witches. I don't go to, I don't know if you call them coven. I mean, I'm using all these terms I've heard in television and on movies, and I don't even know if they're accurate or if these are offensive. But what this really does for me is it gives me a chance, because one of the things that I'm trying to do in my own life is I'm trying to say, I've spent a lot of time as a younger version of myself when I was a kid and going into adolescence, where I wrote people off for various actions that I deemed was inappropriate or not what you're supposed to be doing. So instead of handling it better, I just pruned my garden or my forest, right? Like I got rid of everybody. I was like, click, 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 click. Well, it's given me the back part of that, or the bad part of that, is that it's taken away some of those opportunities to have some really enriching conversations with individual. With that being said, I think, I'm hearing you talk, and I didn't intend for this episode to be such a heavy on the religious side of it, because I do have some other questions that I'd like to go through just to get some understanding of witchcraft. But since we're here in this space, I do kind of want to talk about, if you can go in there, I hear you're saying there's a difference between Satanists and there's a difference between witches, and it's kind of squishy, to use Jamie's terms. But from a Christian's point of view, we have this mindset, and we know that, people have asked me before, do you know if the paranormal is real? Do you know if the supernatural is real? Do you know if there's magic powers? And the answer to all of that is yes, the Bible talks about that. And I know there's a big push right now with Christianity where sometimes we've sanitized the supernatural out of Christianity, and you really can't do that. The Bible, the Bible is just full of all these different things. And I've taken a couple theology classes. I am not a theologian. I'm not claiming to be a theologian. I cannot go toe to toe with people who have spent their entire life studying theology. But what I have learned is starting to open up my mind and starting for me to understand, even reading the Bible and what's in the Bible. And you can't ignore the fact that it touches on a tremendous amount of the supernatural and the spiritual realm. And within the Bible, it does give warnings to stay away from fortune tellers and people who talk with the dead and all of these different things, because it opens you up to have other spirits, demons, whatever we're going to call them, unclean spirits, I think they're mentioned in the Bible. It opens you up to allow those things to come in and use you. And so I guess for me, when I heard all of your talking, and I want to have this opportunity with as much respect as I can, so I hope I'm not being disrespectful, although witchcraft may not be seen from some who are practicing, or even people who aren't practicing, as being Satanist or being evil, do you agree, or is there some truth behind that? Or how would you respond to me if I said, but my understanding of that is that you could still be opening yourself up to being used by spirits or being used by somebody from the spiritual realm, and that in and of itself is kind of an evil act?
Okay, I think that's a really good question, and I think that's something that happens with what you said about the sanitization of the Bible is like Anthropologist Susan is going to talk here for a moment. As we know that there is no human society of which we have records that doesn't have some belief in magic or the manipulation of spiritual forces at some point in their history. So people often forget the very deep cultural context in which the Bible was written, for sure. So these were folks living in a particular place in a particular time. That message has now become a worldwide message that people resonate with. But especially when you get into the Old Testament, there's a lot of very cultural stuff going on right there, right? And so you did have people, and the anthropologist will tell you this is common among desert cultures, of a belief in a world where like what was out there, what you couldn't see, what wasn't in the circle of community was dangerous. And that worldview sort of influences thoughts about, are there evil spirits out there? Are there ghosts that can come get you? that's also a belief we see all across cultures. It's different ways, but the things that can happen. So, I think I'm glad that you kind of brought that up, that there is all this stuff and you can engage with it in a number of ways. I mean, I know Christians who will tell you they are Christian witches and that they make that work for themselves. If you would ask me about is the idea of does this open you up? Well, I would say in my worldview, that's not a thing. In your worldview, that is a thing. And so you can totally be afraid for, and I mean you in the general term, not like you, Mahlon. If you are my friend and you love me and your Christianity has the view towards you might be opening yourself up or, fortune telling is not a good thing. I'm going to tell you, I'm not afraid for myself, but if that is your worldview and you think I don't know, Susan might be doing a thing. I can't tell you that your worldview is wrong and my worldview is right. What I ask people to do is don't be mean to me over it. Don't phone in a bomb threat to my dorm. Don't invite me over to your house for a party and have a group of people I don't know, engage in intercessory prayer or try to do an exorcism on me.
Right.
Let me kind of do my thing, but I'm also not going to be no, I know better than you. You move through a world and have experiences that inform what you believe, what you know to be true. I don't live your life. And it does not hurt me to know that there are people who think my worldview and my practices are evil. It only hurts me if they come and try to hurt me. And I don't take any joy in trying to one up people and be well, you're wrong and I'm right. That seems, for my worldview, that's an act of cruelty. People are moving through their world. They're encountering what they're encountering. They're encountering sacred texts. They're encountering experiences and people, and it informs how they live. And so if there's somebody who out there is well, I'm worried if I read tarot cards or get my cards read, that's going to open me up to demonic forces. Don't get your tarot cards read.
Right.
Don't buy a deck of tarot cards. You're good. How we exist in relationship to each other gets a little more complicated. I don't know, if you start dating somebody who reads tarot and you're gah!
Right.
Then you have to have a bigger conversation.
So I do think the one thing, and I'll kind of put the Christian pin in this statement for the last thing, but I will say from my beliefs and being a Christian, a lot of what we do in our faith is we spread the good news, right? So we know in our belief what Jesus did. We want to tell people. We don't want people to be lost. We don't, so I spent, again, going back to my history, I spent a lot of time, what I thought was doing that, by telling people they shouldn't be doing the things they're doing, and then when they didn't listen, removing them out of my life. To me, that was how I was the beginning stages of me saying, oh, I'm spreading the good word by completely annihilating people that are in my life that aren't doing what I think they should be doing, and then cutting them out completely. Well, I've learned that, and what I'm trying to do now, and I think it's clear you and I probably have very different opposing views, and I think that's fine. And I think what's really cool is that we're also having this mutual respect and conversation, so we are learning from each other. That was a piece that was missing from my life for so many years, and that is something that I think is just as equally as important as not, I don't want to beat over your head. You're wrong. Here's why you're wrong. But in my Christian faith, I do want to say, but I do have this good news that I believe that this is the answer. This is the truth. This is where everybody should go. What I'm learning is, how do I impart that with you, but then have room for you and I to be friends or in a relationship of, even if we're acquaintance, that's still a form of relationship where you and I can maybe still hear one another and have a good conversation like we are today. But I don't have you walk away feeling beat up, and I don't walk away feeling beat up. That's really important, and that's something that I'm learning to do as I'm moving through even this podcasting space, and it's really powerful. But it's hard to do. I mean, how do you share someone that I really care about you and I want what's best for you? However, it may be telling you things that not you personally, but you know what I'm saying, you don't want to hear. But at the same time, can we walk away and still say, let's go get a soda after this and continue our conversation?
Absolutely. And I like, it takes a lot of humility to be able to have that, this sort of, that I do want to like have this conversation. I don't want to beat on somebody. Like what I want to do is have an exchange of ideas, not a debate over who's right.
Right. Yes.
You know? And I think, that's something that I've, especially living in Texas, I had a lot of friends who were raised in a particular flavor of evangelical Christianity where they were taught, like, go out and witness to everyone, and it doesn't matter how much people fight back with you. And who came around to like a more of kind of what I hear you saying, which is that this for me is the truth. This is like the capital G, capital N, good news. And it is the thing that guides my life. And I want the people I love and know and care about to know that about me. But how do you do that in a way that is also,
constructive?
Kind.
Constructive? I mean,
yeah, constructive and kind. And I think it is hard. We don't see a lot of models for it. And, I'll flip it and say, when I first got to Texas and I met people that, like to tell me I was going to hell, I was like, oh God, I'm not going to have Christian friends ever again. And then I realized that I too was cutting people out of my life that were beautiful and valuable and loving people, and had to rethink that. And I think the thing that, I think about a conversation with a friend of mine who, we've been friends for 30 years. And, we finally had a conversation one day, and he said, the thing is, like, I'm always going to think you're a little bit wrong. You're always going to think I'm a little bit wrong. But like, I know you and I know your heart, and you're a good person, and I love you, and you know me, and you know my heart, and you know that I'm a good person, and you love me. And he said, I finally came to realize that the best way for me to be in relationship with people and still be authentic to my charge to spread the good news was to live in the world and be a good and loving person, and literally ask myself, like, what would Jesus do in this situation? He uses the phrase mind your witness a lot. He's like, what are you, like, you got to mind your witness. Like, what are you putting out in the world? And I took that to heart, because I've absolutely known people within the pagan space who would, go toe to toe with Christians and try to like make them feel stupid, or like, I'm going to point out the inconsistencies in your theology, or, historically, da, 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 da. And I'm like, what are you getting out of that? Like, what are you getting out of that? Except for that you get to feel self-righteous for 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. Like, why not that we have this conversation? And when you have a friendship with somebody, you figure out where your boundaries around conversations about a lot of things are. And, if you want to I want to have people in my life that have different worldviews. I don't necessarily want to have somebody in my life who, tells me what a horrible person I am all day.
Right. But I agree with you. You do want people in your life that are going to challenge you, and you're going to want people. I think, Jamie, you've used this before on our past episode, like iron sharpens iron. You do want to have sometimes that friction, because if you just go the easy path and everybody's always agreeing with you, to me, that's when you stop really growing and stop challenging yourself. And I say this in my work life too. I never want to stop learning. I never want to stop challenging myself, because I always want to be better tomorrow than I am today. And when I stop wanting to do that, there's real danger there. So what you're saying, it resonates with me, and that is what I'm kind of like working on, doing a self-work on. Yep. It's just that balance between everything else we talked about. But no, I appreciate your point of view, and I agree with that. I think that's really good for us to have these types of conversations and walk away and say, okay, we still might not see eye to eye, but we can still go get a soda after this and keep talking or getting to know one another. And I think that's what's really powerful.
Well, and
Go ahead,
I was going to say, I just, you kind of wrapped up the thesis of roundtable mindset in this last part of the conversation. But as we wrap up, I did have one more question that I would like to ask.
Yeah, for sure. I know we went a little bit further afield than you might have thought.
That's all right.
It was good. Yeah, it's so good.
It never lands where we think it's going to land. It always kind of takes its own path, which is good. But I'm curious.
Sometimes start when we think it's going to start.
Yeah, that's true too. Technical difficulties. Okay, so my question is, if there's one concept or perception about you as a witch or the community that you're part of that you wish people had a better understanding about? If there's one thing that you could say, you know what, this is something I would like the world to know about me and the people around me that I practice with, what would that be?
Oh, that's a big one. I think, I mean, you could go to the easy, which is like, we don't eat babies. We don't sacrifice puppies. We're not out there trying to hurt people. But, that's the low hanging fruit, right? I think what I would want most people to know sort of about me and the people that I have around me, knowing that in any community of several million people, you have all kinds of people. Like you're probably going to meet people that practice witchcraft that are jerks too, but they're jerks because they're jerks, not because they practice witchcraft. Is that, we are like anybody else, trying to get through this sort of human experience. And that, this is a worldview and a set of practices that, like all like religions or spiritual practices, help us get through like the human experience. And that, if I can be anthropologist, Susan, for a moment, that most people, it's still very unusual, although it's more common for people to be raised in this now. Most people come to these practices as adults after a lot of religious seeking and searching. And so there's sometimes a misunderstanding that like you were just vulnerable and dumb and you fell into this. And it's like, no, that most people that practice this, it has been, and I think this is true of a lot of people who go through conversion to any religion or engage in what like in the literature we call religious switching, is that like things have been very well considered and people choose this path, and we don't choose it because we don't want to be Christians. We choose it because sometimes there's that idea that's like, oh, you left the church and you just ran to this. That is the data doesn't support that. Most of us are very well read in world religions and have, after deep contemplation, deciding that this worldview and these practices are what make the most sense for us, to navigate our human experience. Most pagans generally and most witches have no interest in converting anybody else, and do not necessarily object to people believing different things. And I think that's a thing because that's our model, right? In this society is we assume that, oh, if you believe it, you must want everybody to believe it. And I'm like, no, I love listening to Mahlon talk about his Christianity. Like, I'm so happy for you that you have that in your life, and it clearly brings you a moral compass, and it clearly brings you a lot of joy. And I love that. And I would rather you be like Christian Mahlon, like the way I'm meeting you right now, than coming over to be kind of like a half-ass pagan. Like I would, so that's kind of what, something I want people to know. And that, I mean, to wrap it up with the Halloween theme, like witches in pop culture are scary, but while some of us will make that stereotype work for us, I have a black pointy hat. Most of us are pretty normal people. Like we like to garden. We often have way too many pets. We have relationships and people we love and
jobs. Right.
And, and we all got to stand in the line at the Target, which is harder at this time of year because they have the Halloween stuff out and it's awesome because you can use that decor all year.
So you touched on one where you have, you said you have a black pointy hat. I got to ask, is there a cauldron anywhere as we keep going through the stereotypes? Yep. Oh, you do? Okay.
I do. I own two that are actually cast iron. And one of them started out life as a cast iron Dutch oven from the camping store.
Oh.
Huh. What about a broom?
I have a broom. When my wife and I had our spiritual ceremony when we got married, brooms they're common in African American culture, but they're also common in Irish culture from where we both have extraction. So we're not appropriating. But jumping over a broom in front of the people, especially because when my wife and I had our marriage ceremony, we could not legally get married. And so we are now, but we couldn't at that time. And so we were making a commitment to each other in front of the people that we loved. And we bought a cinnamon broom from the dollar store.
I love those at
and
Halloween
stepped
time.
over it. They're awesome. And we, made our promises to each other, and we stepped over that as a symbol of stepping into our new life. And it hangs above the door of my living room.
That's funny. Well, Susan, again, I think I could speak for myself, and Jamie, you probably will not. I could talk to you for at least another couple hours. I think there's a lot of stuff. We have a list of questions. I know I sent them to you. We haven't even touched on some of them. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to bring you back or ask you to come back maybe a little bit later.
I would love to.
Where we can dive in.
To.
Yeah, I think diving into any part of these aspects. I know that I've taken some mental notes for myself that I'm like, ooh, that'd be another way to kind of come back and have a conversation. But for today, I just want to thank you again. I know we touched on it, to be able to come into this space and be open-minded enough and respectful enough that we can hear one another. And yes, there's some things that both of us have probably said about what we know of the other one or what we thought we know of the other one that is just like, I don't know about that. We did it in such a way that we think we heard one another today. And I think that's really, really important. So I want to say thank you. I appreciate, and we appreciate your time coming on and kind of sharing your thoughts and telling us a little bit about, witches and witchcraft, especially during this Halloween spooky season. So thank you for that. And, we'll hope we get to talk again soon and have you come back on and explore some more of this. That'd be really interesting.
Absolutely. I'd love to come back. This was a great conversation, and it's one of those things where it can go so many ways. I could be here for another 3 hours, trust me.
Yes.
But I'd love to come back anytime to talk about this or anything else. So and I just really appreciate y'all. We're really easy to work with and really kind. And as somebody who's been doing public education about witchcraft and paganism for 30 years and did most of it in the Deep South, this isn't always my experience. Oh. So thank you.
Well, and that's going to be an episode in and of itself, just you telling us about those.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. But and I love that you're doing this project and that you're trying to model. I mean, it's go back. I'll say it's mine and your witness. It's how you have these conversations. It's how we show up and live our beliefs in the world. To be able to have a space to have a conversation, and even when it's hard or it makes you feel prickly and weird, you push through it and you have it in a way that's productive. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you being on, and hope to visit with you again soon. So thank you.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, that wraps it up for us today on Roundtable Mindset. We'll
Bye,
talk
everyone.
to you soon. Bye-bye. This episode was recorded and edited by Mahlon and Jamie. Music was Whack-A-Lantern by Ender.
If you want to interact with us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and the app formerly known as Twitter, just by searching Roundtable Mindset Podcast. If you want to email us, our email address is roundtablemindset@gmail.com. Or you can call us at 402-819-8999. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time at the Roundtable.